You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, Podcaster for India Inc. is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.
Hey.
No, it goes, hello. Welcome to HR Bandit. This is your host.
Okay. I can attest that the two of you would make wonderful hosts, but you're not snatching my podcast from me just yet. Bandits, don't worry. I am still your host for the pod. But as you can tell, we have not one, but two guests with us today. For those here for the first time, I'm Ankita Podar. I'm so glad you've made it to this episode. This is our fourth episode. Do go and listen to the rest. For those returning, welcome back. We are flipping things around slightly today. So I'm going to start by introducing my two colleagues before I move into our top three stories for the day. First up, Aadil Bandukwala, Senior Director of Marketing at HackerRank. He's one of India's top 20 most influential people in human resources on social media for 5 years running, as per SHRM. That's 2014 to 2019. I can guarantee it would have been 6 years running had they released a list in 2020. I'm assuming they didn't. He's also an author and the podcast host for the Great Indian Marketing Show, which for all of 2021 has been trending as one of India's best marketing podcasts. Our second guest is Atma Godara, who is the production HR generalist for Netflix in HR. He also wears many hats as a startup mentor and as an HR influencer. Welcome to the show, Atul and Atma. How are you feeling today?
Well, I'm super pumped. Thank you for hosting us, Ankita and Atma. Glad to see you. I've been meaning to ask you a question. Forget about your work life at Netflix. What are you watching these days on Netflix?
Thank you very much, Ankita and Aadil, for having me here. And yes, Aadil, I have just finished House of Cards a few days back. How about you? What are you binging these days?
I've just wrapped up one of my favorite shows called The Blacklist, and I'm totally fascinated with this character called Raymond Reddington. I also recently finished Selling Sunset, which is about real estate and fancy houses in the LA area. And now I'm on the final season of Lucifer.
Oh, wow. Okay. I have to admit, I don't have a Netflix account. So don't kill me. Here's my condition. I promise, if the two of you can get this episode 500 listens in the next 30 days before we release our next one, I promise, Atma, I promise I'll get myself a subscription. How does that sound?
I thought you'd sponsor a year's subscription for Atma and me if we did that.
Okay. If we get it to 1,000, I will do that. We're still very new. We're like baby podcasts. So if you do 1,000, I sponsor yours too.
Done and done, Atma. We've got to go to work.
Deal. Is a deal.
Absolutely. With that, let me introduce, and it should be an easy task because we have our best lineup till date. First up, the 4-day week. Now, I've had this on the list of topics ever since we started our first episode. But with Iceland making news for its 4-day work week experiment success, it had to make it on today's episode. For our second topic, the Soul Publishing experimented with abolishing both meetings and emails. Call it crazy, call it smart. We'll talk about it today. Our last and final story is languishing. I finally discovered the word for how we've been feeling, all thanks to Adam Grant. You've got to love that man. We have lots to talk about today. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Are you ready to go? Big thumbs up all around. Okay, our first topic, 4-day work week, or what I prefer to call the compressed work week. Because let's face it, we can end up working 50 hours in the 4 days, which is something I could do without. Now, Iceland made news because of the trial runs between 2015 and 2019, initiated by the Reykjavik City Council and the Icelandic national government, in response from demand to trade unions and civil society organizations. Now, these trials ultimately involved 2,500 workers, which is more than 1% of the nation's working population. They moved from the traditional 40-hour week to a 35 to 36-hour week without a reduction in pay. I don't think that's a huge reduction in work hours, but it is what it is. Now, the benefits are hazy, but what it is, what we would expect. We saw a rise in productivity, more time for family, lower stress. Now, given Iceland's success, New Zealand, Germany, Spain all seem to be toying to the idea. The last I heard, UK was added to the list. Now, there were a few interesting observations that the rise in productivity was attributed to shorter coffee breaks because people wanted to get everything done within the 4 days. There were shorter meetings. Fewer emails were circulated. Now, all of these would probably give rise to an increase in productivity, even if we did it 5 hours. Now, for the sake of argument, let's say 4-day week is a slam dunk. Legislation goes to dictate 4 days a week. I'm curious about what happens to benefits that generally accrue. So does time off get impacted? Gratuity, does that shift? So Aadil, being a senior person on the show, I'm going to throw it to you. Give me your opinion on what will happen. And also talk about with the 4-day work week, what your opinion is on the concept in general.
Hey, calling me senior, you make me feel old. Yeah, I'm still in my 30s. I'm not that old yet. I'd like to be younger. I still like to be branded as the Instagram generation and not the Facebook generation. But anyways, thanks for looping me in, Ankita. I'll get started. There are two ways to look at it. One is with the macro lens and the other is with the micro lens. Let's start with the macro lens. You see, the coronavirus has broken through two kind of shifts, cultural and technological barriers that prevented remote work in the past, setting in motion a structural shift in where work takes place, at least for some people. Now, if you look at our country, which is India, which is globally known for its high-tech and financial services industries, the vast majority of our workforce is about 464 million, which is employed in occupations like retail services and agriculture. These can't be done remotely, and this is important to underline. You see, more than half of this workforce today has little or no opportunity for remote work. Some jobs require collaborating with others using specialized machinery. Other jobs, such as doing CT scans, must be done on a precise location. Or some making deliveries are performed while out and about. Many such jobs are low wage and at more risk from broad trends such as automation and digitization. Therefore, a 4-day week for the masses seems a little stretched at this point in time because they're pretty much working 6 or in some cases even 7 days a week. Now, for those of us who are called the digital workforce and far more luckier, hybrid models of remote work are likely to persist in the wake of the pandemic, mostly for the highly educated, well-paid minority, if I may call us so. And this gets me into the micro view of things. For this specific minority, I foresee that the work is moving from a time-based module to that of an outcome-based module. What I mean by that is we were historically used to punching in and punching out at specific times, and we were comped for our time. Now, as the business landscape shifts, I think people are being rewarded, and generously at that, for their outcomes. So bottom line, what I'd like to communicate and my thoughts is that it really doesn't matter whether it's 4 days or 5 days, so long as one delivers. And therefore, I think today we're already seeing this set in motion where people, nobody asks you in office, how many hours did you work today? What they ask you is, hey, these are your OKRs for this quarter. These are your weekly OKRs. These are your monthly OKRs. Are you shipping stuff? Is the team happy with you? Are you making progress? And if that is a resounding yes, then it really doesn't matter whether it's 4 or 5. And that brings me back to your question, which is then what happens to pay? What happens to parity? What happens to benefits? I think they all stay the same. But you know what? I don't know. I wish I could crystal yes, but the future seems very exciting.
Absolutely. And I think there's a good point in moving to outcome-based. But what happens when legislation steps in? For example, in Ireland, I can say they've come up with the right to disconnect policy, which essentially is a mandate that you can disconnect after what work designates as hours. And if someone, you can take organizations to court under certain conditions. Similarly, they are now considering a right to request for remote work and things like that. So if legislature tomorrow was to step in and say it has to be a 4-day work week, so whether you're outcome-based, whether you're not outcome-based, it kind of puts you in my opinion, in some kind of soup. Atma, what do you think?
No, I absolutely love the idea where, Aadil started with the concept of a macro view or a micro view, because I hear and read so many conversations around hybrid work model, workforce of the future, workforces of the tomorrow. But what everybody forgets that in all these conversations, we are addressing only these minorities, what Aadil pointed out a while ago. Having said that, what I see, the 4 days work week is a natural evolution. Sometimes people used to work 7 days a week, then it came to 6 days. That, it's like sort of, if I talk about India specifically, it is 40 hours, 8 hours, 5 day, 40 hours. And eventually and naturally, because, more and more workers will come into the picture, their rights, their awareness, and, how do we value more about the personal life? And are people doing multiple jobs? Because if I'm working, say, 4 days here, I have a choice to work 3 days somewhere else also, right? So if we are talking about the low paying jobs, it is a greater thing for them also, because in this case, they have choices to do 2 jobs over a period of 1 week. Unlike, for example, if an Uber driver is driving a car today, he or she has to drive for almost 7 days a week. Having said that, one thing is very important, that government needs to ensure that the working hours, wages, time off, now all these are protected for the larger workforce. This would automatically take care of this sizable chunk of the population, which Aadil was mentioning, not the minority, what we are talking about here. Of course, it will attract more capital from the employers and the entrepreneurs. Those things will also be there in the place. But again, as I see, it is a natural evolution, how the employers and entrepreneurs are changing over a period of time. See, having said that, the startups and the new age organizations, they will continue function 7 days a week. This is a reality. Nobody can take that away, right? Any new startup, a new organization, in the initial few years, I have worked with few, you have worked with some of them. They have this natural, right? I was working somewhere, they were having 6 days of work week, then they had alternate Saturdays. Now they have 5 days, so on and so forth. So that is a natural evolution. Again, you can't help it there. But having said that, there are lots of research and, the countries, what you have also mentioned about Iceland, which talks lots about productivity increase if you try and do a 4 days work week. So I see it happening very soon in the future.
I think it's really fascinating. Imagine 4 days work week. You still accrue all your regular time off. Even better, you get like unlimited time off. So maybe you could get away with doing like a 3-day week. I don't know.
But then that begs the question, right, Ankita, if we have so many days off and we still don't deliver, now that's a problem for the organization, right? Which is why I think this is a huge dilemma for the leaders in terms of what amount of freedom is good freedom and what amount of freedom is not so good freedom. It's ultimately, we're all talking about building a trust based economy. And if you have a great trusted handshake, then, you can really trust your employees to go do whatever. They don't need to, accrue their hours at all. They can be at leisure whenever they want, so long as they deliver, which is why, I'm very obsessed with this whole outcome driven model.
And there's another reason I love it. Can you imagine, look at it from a macro view of multiple organizations. The fact that if we, for example, ever move to a 3-day work week, you're actually contributing back more to the GDP, because if I want to make more money, I will hold 2 jobs doing 3 days in each. So you could actually get away with, whether you have gig economy and all of that. There's just endless possibilities, which, as you said, Aadil, I think the future is going to be a very exciting place.
You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, podcaster for India Inc. is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.
I'm going to move on to the second topic. It flows from the first, but it's the one that fascinates me the most. I know we've had a few conversations in the past where we've said this is probably a concept that's landed from the future to now. Now, we've often talked about the importance of uninterrupted blocks of time to enhance productivity. I'm going to talk about Adam Grant many times on this episode. Now, in one of his articles, he mentioned that a Fortune 500 software company in India tested a simple policy. No interruptions Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday before noon. When engineers managed the boundary themselves, 47% had above average productivity. And when the company set quiet time as the official policy, 65% achieved above average productivity. So there's clearly, a concept where organizations need to step in and help. Now, there was nothing magical about these 3 days. It could have been any other days. The whole concept was uninterrupted blocks of time. And then came along a Russia-based digital studio, the Soul Publishing. They decided to attempt abolishing meetings and emails. Now, abolishing is a stretch, but they've built in a lot of friction in setting up meetings. There's a 2-page SOP on how to set meetings, what to set things about, and how to go about the entire process. Now, because Aadil didn't want to be called senior, I'm going to say, Atma, senior number 2. I'll go to you first about this. How do you feel about a no meeting world?
Yeah, thank you, Ankita. Coming from the childhood days when every movie was about number 1, listening to number 2 is really fascinating. So thank you so much. See, I remember this famous cartoon by New Yorker last year when the pandemic has hit all of us. There's this guy sitting on the laptop sending out an email, and the line says that if this meeting could have been an email, right? So there are so many meetings which could have been an email or a message or something like that. If I talk about a no meeting at all, it is a very fascinating concept, first of all, I say. But having said that, I think the intent or keeping a meeting is more important to, bring all the people together to brainstorm the ideas. If we are having the meeting to decide on some operational activities, to reach to a conclusion in terms of something which could have been shared in a memo prior to the meeting or over the email, or something which could be shared across using any other collaboration tool. We have so many today. It is a sheer waste of time for everyone. Second point in terms of meeting, having those larger meetings where we have 50 people or 60 people. I mean, one part of it is from the communication team. I understand you have to have a town hall, for example, right? Town hall are always monologue and one-way communication. I understand we can't call them meetings. But having a meeting on a regular basis, we are calling 50 people or 40 people, I really don't see any point there. So reducing the number of meetings and focusing more on what is there to brainstorm after, sitting in that meeting by 5 or 6 people is more helpful than, just going in those recurring meetings. Also, those recurring meetings, what we talk about, having those weeklies, bi-weeklies and monthlies, I really don't see a point there. If you have something to discuss, please go ahead and attend that meeting. If as a team, 3 of us are working in the same team, and in a particular month, if we don't have anything to talk about, is there a necessity to have that team meeting? Of course not. So these are some of the ideas. Again, these are very contextual. A particular leader or a particular team has to decide what works best for them or what doesn't work really good for them. I will give you an example from a more creative world. In the creative world, people do come together in groups because they have to brainstorm, they have to come with the ideas, and they have to, write together, probably something, develop together, say a character or a story. A group does a wonderful task together. If you go to an operational sector, or if you go to a manufacturing or a process plant for that matter, where everything is done by the SOPs, you are technically not doing anything. I have seen in those industries, the meetings are more about, updates or the procedures or, sort of reporting for kind of a thing, what happens every day at the end of the day. So I really don't see any point of having meetings on those industries. Vis-a-vis the creative side, we do require meetings and people coming together to brainstorm, to develop character and stories and the ideas.
Very interesting point you brought about, Atma, where you really talked about meetings that happen just for updates. And it's an interesting angle that Ankita brought in, where she's saying, you got to envision a no meeting world and what would that look like? But I try to ask myself, why do meetings fail? What's the root cause of meetings? And if you do a RC analysis, I think most meetings wind up falling into 3 categories. The first one is called the update. This is normally a good conversation or a high quality 1:1, or just telling people, hey, this is what is happening and this is what you can expect. The second one is what I call the vent. This is essentially like a therapy session, which most often comes in the form of, somebody being pissed off and they having to lash on you, where you just have to listen and do nothing about it. Well, you actually should, but a lot of times, people just process it and then don't action it. The last form of meeting, which is what I call, for the lack of a better word, is a disaster, where everyone's freaking out because something broke, something did not ship, the customers got an escalation. Call this like the advanced form of the vent. Now, if you think about where this happens more often than not in scaling organizations, because as you scale and you add team members to your team, decisions take longer. And the amount of time they take is what we call in the startup world a form of tax, which is called scale tax. And more often, you will see that scale tax can be ugly during meetings. And why is this ugly? Because the need of the hour today is collaboration at scale, 2, radical transparency, and 3, the ability to ship products really fast. Now for this, meetings need to have a singular goal, and that goal is that of alignment. Basis my research, I've seen like these can form into 3 categories. One is called the 1:1s, or the alignment and connection meetings. The second one are staff meetings. Ideally, these happen at the beginning of every week. They are normally done for tone setting, planning, and debate. And the last one, which is an important one, which should happen more often, is tapestry meetings. Now, these are periodic informal meetings for people to get to know each other. It's important to do them. They're called culture building meetings. Now, if we're able to do these 3, and categorically do these 3 and avoid the rest, I think we'll be able to avoid scale tax and focus only on stuff that matters. But normally I'm not much of a thinker, I'm more of an executioner. So if we had to go execute no meeting days, I think it's a great idea, we should. Because at HackerRank itself, we tried this out last quarter where every Friday was a no meeting Friday. I personally benefited a lot from it. And slowly, I think as we start doing these phased experiments, hopefully we'll get someday to a no meeting world view. But maybe start with phased experiments is what I'd be thinking.
I love that, especially on how you put a structure about the kind of meetings. In fact, you just created an entire SOP for us right there on how to do it. I do think no meetings or abolishing meetings is one extreme, which as the world becomes remote and that becomes like a reality of life, is going to increasingly, like, meetings are the only place where you'd actually speak to anyone. I'm not a big fan of that. But because you mentioned radical transparency, I'm going to throw in one other element, and then Atma, I'm going to get closing thoughts from you on this topic. Along with meetings, they also tried abolishing emails, because they said the very nature of emails is them being opaque, because the only people who get visibility into that content are the people who it's sent to. So instead, they've said we'll use a Slack-like or a WhatsApp-like forum where you post everything there, and everyone posted with hashtags and labels so that everyone has visibility if they want to, and you can sort. But it's pushing up the transparency that takes place in the conversation. Those 2 combined make sole publishing a little challenging for all new hires as per them. But once they get used to it, people love it. Atma, I want your view of if you were to join sole publishing today, how are you going to feel about it?
This reminds me, of something long back. I had a colleague, and he gave a very beautiful analogy of the emails. He told me that, emails are nothing but modern day files. In earlier days, you had files and you had someone to carry those files from one office to the other office. I was in a plant, so we had like our separate offices, right? I was sitting somewhere else in my office, the HR head was sitting somewhere else, the HR colleague was sitting somewhere else, so on and so forth. Instead of the person who was carrying these files in this office maybe 30 years back, now the server is carrying these files from this place to that place, again to president, so on and so forth. I really like that analogy. And if you ask me honestly, emails are not a great way to, get things done. It is a great medium to get communication through the teams. What I was saying in the last conversation also, it is when we have town halls, it is more sort of a monologue, one-way communication. So email is a great channel when you have somebody joining your team, somebody joining your organization, when you have the CEO message, the CXO message, and all those information which you put on their the system, and they go through it, everything which is available. Having said that, coming back to the using Slack or GChat or other these tools which are available to us in terms of tracking, I think there was this tool. There are so many tools which are available these days, which is sort of what we call issue tracking products, which are there in the market. And I used one, and I tell you, it worked wonderfully. And I tell you the context also. In one of the organizations where I was working, the issue was how do we track who is handling the responsibility, say in terms of hiring. I was sort of a program manager for hiring for one team. So this tool we were using, Jira we were using there. And it is a wonderful tool. You know exactly where the task is pending, which person is supposed to complete that task, what is the aging of that particular step in the entire activity, and it is visible to everyone. So technically, we closed so many positions in lesser number of days, and there was no email communication between any of us, right from the CEO to the last recruiter in the entire team.
I love the analogy of files. I never thought about it, but when you said it, it seems so obvious. I'm like, why did it not strike me? Adil, I'm going to get your thoughts on the email thing, because I think between meetings and abolishing abolishing meetings and abolishing emails, I would choose abolishing emails.
I think this is a very interesting question, because it strikes me as we need to ask, what is going to be a remote first tech stack for a CHR? So think about it. Normally, we've always had tech stacks where CTOs have worried about it, because developers need to work on tech stacks so that companies can ship and products can thrive. But now I think we need to go back and study companies like GitLab. Like GitLab is a company which has 5,000 plus employees, $100 million in revenue. From day one, they've been a remote first company. Think about that, right? They've never had a single office. They've never met ever. But it's such a profitable company, such an amazing company, which begs me to ask the question, we're all using today something like a Slack, you're using Jira, like Atma said, Atlassian's Confluence, you're using email, you're using Zoom. You'll be using a combination of these. I think it's important that CHROs start thinking about what their integrated people tech stack is going to look like. Can you imagine like an all-in-one? I've been fascinated with the software I've been using lately. It's an app called text.com, texts.com. What it does is it consolidates all your different channels into a single global inbox. And you don't open multiple apps, you open a single app. Right? For example, it integrates iMessage, SMS, WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Slack, Discord, all of these into a single app. Now, all day I'm just running from app to app, but now I just have a single window and I can prioritize whichever I want to be a part of or not. So what it does, it helps me prioritize where to spend my time rather than me being a slave to a plethora of different apps. So here's what I'm keen to know. I think I'm very keen to know like how are CHROs imagining their new age people tech stacks, and basis that I think then we'll be able to answer whether we should kill email meetings or something else. The humble answer is, Ankita, I don't know, but it largely depends on the discovery to tech stacks.
The learning never stops. I'm going to move to our last topic and then I'll get us out of here with that, because these are never ending conversations and I have so many follow-up questions. We're going to pick it up on LinkedIn, Twitter, and everywhere else. But with that, I'm going to go to languishing. Another article, Adam Grant again. I've spent a year and a half dragging my feet. It seems to be a dominant emotion, not just for me, but for many friends and colleagues that I've been speaking with. Adam Grant's piece from the New York Times, he calls it languishing. He says, it wasn't burnout. We still had energy. It wasn't depression. We didn't feel hopeless. We just felt somewhat joyless and aimless. It turns out there's a name for that. Now, languishing is a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It feels as though you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield. And he says it might be the dominant emotion of 2021. It's been mentioned by a number of managers. What I want to know is, does this word resonate with the two of you? And if you have tips on how to deal with this, both as individuals and as organizations.
I think the word resonates with a lot of us because we've all read Adam's article. I think the root of the problem perhaps goes to us as leaders not prioritizing feelings of employees. I think a lot of us as leaders prioritize goals and prioritize tasks. And I think this is where we've got to go back and figure out a framework to prioritize feelings of employees. Because part of the why so many people are languishing is that they're not getting enough positive human interaction and validation. And you think about it, people constantly post on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. And why? Because they want those likes, because they want to feel validated. They want people's time. I think a lot of times we don't do that to our teams. We don't give them enough positive human interaction and validation. So I think it's important to do that. It's important to promote the concept of time off. And thirdly, and most importantly, according to me, I was chatting to you about this last time, Ankita. I think it's important to promote the concept of flow. And I want to talk a little bit about the concept of flow, right? In positive psychology, a flow state, which is colloquially being in the zone, if you will, is like a mental state in which a person performing some activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and enjoyment in the process of that activity. And that is where I think growth happens, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you draw a 2x2 matrix, and on the y-axis, let's say you have task difficulty, and on the x-axis you have skill level, and just try and imagine this as I speak, is if you have high task difficulty and high skill level, that's when you're in flow. That is where your growth and your flow will happen. But let's say if you have high task difficulty and low skill level, you're probably going to be in anxiety and frustration. Now, inversely, if you have high skill level and low task difficulty, you're going to be bored, right? You're going to have loss of interest. So it's extremely important for you to have flow, meaning we should align our employees whose task difficulties, skill levels, and interest match with the same kind of vectors. And Elon Musk talks a lot about prioritizing your vectors, right? But if you prioritize your vectors along with the skills and passions that you have, I think that is when you attain flow. And if all of us attain flow, I think languishing will cease to exist. But easier said than done. Atma, I'm keen to know what you're thinking of.
Aadil, thank you very much. I mean, the way you talked about, the variety and the skill, putting these two together, the boredom piece at the one side, at one extreme, and anxiety at the other extreme is super, I think, helpful context for all the employers and the organizations, what I believe. And if I talk about me personally, when we had the second wave in the country, I did feel it. I mean, all of us were feeling it, and all of us were affected either directly or indirectly through the second wave specifically. And as you rightly said, how do you come out of languishing? So when you're in flow, it is sort of anti-languishing, I would say. When you're in the zone, you're in the flow, that is typically anti-languishing. So like, how do you go from here to there? So typically when you are languishing, you want to reach to that stage as an individual. I mean, try to start small. I mean, do it in smaller pieces, small things. When you do and when you achieve those things, start celebrating those things. It will help you and you will feel motivated a bit. If I do a small thing that, hey, today I will say walk 2,000 steps instead of running for 5 kilometers. If I am able to complete that step, I would feel motivated. If I am feeling motivated, then I would be able to focus more on the small task what I was doing. Then what will happen? That small task would be incremental. Today I was walking 2,000 steps. Tomorrow I will walk probably 5,000, or by the end of the week, I might go for a run also. What is happening? I'm doing it in a very small steps. I'm focusing more on those steps and making it, more incremental in nature. And finally, I'm landing in the zone what Aadil spoke about at a length. That zone or that, flow, what you call it. Finally, I'm there. And of course, when I'm there, I'm out of language in a way. This is what I have tried and it did work for me. Ankita.
And I love how the conversation's gone like a complete connected circle. Like everything we talked about today, be it 4-day week, uninterrupted blocks of time, no emails, everything was trying to give us the space to get into a state of flow, because we can't do that with constant interruptions. And maybe that's one way that organizations can think about how do we preserve time that we can give back those chunks and make the environment conducive in order to let the individual hit a state of flow. I'm going to get you out of here. It's been one of the most fascinating conversations on the pod till date. But before I go, you know how we've always heard about a Superman stance can help bring confidence? Maybe you did that before getting on this podcast. But I heard somewhere, and a little birdie told me that imitating a powerful animal could probably get you out of languishing. Aadil, in my head, the most common power animal is a lion. So, will you give me a roar and then tell me if it kills languishing for you?
I'm going to give you a roar and I'm going to embarrass the shit out of that lion for sure. So, here we go.
That's a powerful one.
Oh my God, Atma, what's your power animal?
Oh, it's a very subtle, powerful one. It's quack, quack.
Oh, wow. Well, I don't know about you, I'm not languishing as of this moment. And if I do...
But Ankita, I just want to cut you off there. I love the duck, because it appears calm and unruffled on the surface, but paddles like the devil beneath. So Atma shows a lot of character, man. Phenomenal. Love the whole duck example.
I know. Duck as a power animal. Who would have thought? God, thank you. And on the behalf of NHRDN, Aadil, Atma, and me, we are out. Woof, woof.
You're tuned in to the HR Bandit podcast, your one-way ticket to the latest and craziest in the world of work. In partnership with Timber Media, podcaster for India Inc., is sponsored by Adrenaline E-Systems Limited.